Alright, today I really need to talk about the character of Ragatha, as this recent episode of the Digital Circus, and really the last few episodes, have been playing with her character quite a bit, and the recent episode maybe even hinted at the idea that Ragatha was being physically hurt by her own mother, in addition to being emotionally hurt. Now, I've said in previous videos that I feel like Ragatha is sort of a main character in a way that Pomni is not, as it's Ragatha's backstory that seems to tie so much together emotionally. While Jack's or Kinger's backstories may say more about the circus and why they are all there, the reason Ragatha is the way she is somehow sets up the entire social dynamic in the Digital Circus. Without her, this world really just revolves around Jax, with him being an antagonist that Ragatha is willing to stand up to, but for some reason, the characters give Jax varying degrees of slack in ways that they don't for Ragatha. Zooble in particular seems willing to fight back against Jax as well, especially to defend Gangle. But when Ragatha did that in the most recent episode, she was treated a bit differently. When Ragatha gets upset with Jax near the end of the baseball adventure, it's after being told by Pomni that it's healthy to be a jerk sometimes. But when Ragatha starts to defend herself against Jax, Pomni suggests that she calm down. This isn't even the first time that Ragatha has blown up like this, and we see Ragatha focusing more on fighting against Jax than helping Gangle when Jax breaks her mask in episode 4. It's Zooble who gets Gangle away from their drama and gives her a new mask to try and address her issues. This dynamic is interesting, but I didn't understand exactly what was going on until recently with episode 5, where Jax makes it clear that his issue with Ragatha runs deeper than even she seems to know. A lot of people say the whole "I may be a bully" line, but at least I'm direct about it, and I'm honestly not a believer that being direct about it is any better. But it can be easier to trust, and that's something we kind of see the characters doing with Jax. Pomni isn't sure if she should trust Jax when he is nice, such as when he tries to talk to her in episode 5, or when he just strikes up some chit-chat with her in episode 4 during their long and exhausting shift. She does worry that it is some sort of trick, but thus far, when she plays nice back to him, it works out reasonably enough. The problem with Ragatha is that when she plays nice, it may not be that she's really sincere. Jax seems to have evidence of this with her own history, likely seeing Ragatha as constantly trying to make friends with him, but in a way that is ultimately very controlling. She had said when she was on the Stupid Sauce in episode 4 that she doesn't like Jax, but she wants Jax to like her. And he may see her as treating everyone that way, with Ragatha not really liking Pomni, but having reasons to want Pomni to like her, especially in this limited space of the circus. And maybe that has started to give Pomni some doubts about her too. Maybe she's starting to trust that when Jax is nice, it's because he's nice, and when he's mean, it's because he's mean. But when Ragatha's nice, it could be because she's mean, and when she's mean, it's definitely because she's mean. The point is that Ragatha is basically just trying to hold herself back, where Jax is just who he is, and you get to accept whether or not you're close to him in that moment or not, based on the way he's acting. It could make Pomni feel like she's just a pawn in their little social game, or at least Ragatha's, as Jax doesn't seem to be playing a game socially, even if he's just playing games elsewise. Now, the reason Ragatha is the way she seems to be is because of her mother, who she made very clear was the person she thinks the most about since entering the circus. The reason she thinks about her so much is because of how toxic their dynamic was. According to Ragatha, her mom would berate her, talk down to her, and guilt trip her, and that is just what she was willing to admit before she got embarrassed. This holding back that Ragatha does seems to come from being guilt-tripped by her mother. Whether Ragatha did something right or wrong, her mother would use that to make Ragatha feel bad, to make her feel guilty even if she ultimately is just doing something like standing up for herself. This has clearly made her the person she is today, where she can't just be direct about how she feels, and from her mother, she likely would have learned that manipulation is the only way. One way to do that is being nice and pleasant, something her mother seemed to force on Ragatha at a young age with rich people etiquette and the like. But another tactic would be the same kind of manipulation that her mother used against her. Guilt-tripping, berating, and generally just playing pleasant while being mean. These can be valid when used on the right person, honestly, and I imagine Ragatha used them on Jax trying to guilt-trip him, but with Jax being so self-centered, he would see right through these kinds of tricks. And because of that, he's able to call out Ragatha when she seems to be using people like Pomni as opposed to genuinely trying to connect with them. And considering that Ragatha seems to see friends as either being with Jax or with her only, he may have some valid point there. Now, with all of that in mind, the real thing I want to talk about in this video is the idea that Ragatha may have actually been physically hurt by her mother in addition to those emotional attacks. This is not something Ragatha said, but with everything else she's been through, a little childhood violence sounds very possible. It's something she may have brought up if she was able to to continue talking before everyone stared at her awkwardly. Or it may be something that she doesn't think about too often because of how intense it is, but also because of how much she blames herself. As many people grow up thinking that the violence they faced from an adult or parent is something they needed as a form of discipline. But the reason I think this is because of what Ragatha is in the Digital Circus game, a ragdoll. Now, a ragdoll is a doll that is designed for more rough play. It's important to remember that old-fashioned dolls were often made of glass and were very breakable. They were considered a sign of wealth because it meant a father could afford something that a child could just end up breaking, and it was believed that it taught girls how to be delicate in preparation for motherhood. But there's always kids who just wanted something to play with in a rough way, yes, even girls, and ragdolls became a cheap, often homemade solution to give a little girl a toy that could really take a beating. Now, I use the phrase take a beating here because it's for this very reason that a ragdoll, it's a term used to describe someone who exists to take a beating essentially in one way or another. This can be an emotional ragdoll, which itself is also a term, but it can also be used to refer to someone who is in a bad situation where they are being physically hurt repeatedly. Ragatha in the circus itself is a ragdoll. She is someone that exists mostly for Jax to pick on, not much different from Gangle or anyone else that Jax may find a way to torture. While Gangle gets most of Jax's torture these days, the pilot showed Jax torturing Ragatha in particular and scaring her with the idea of psychological torture as well, such as with bugs in her room. But these symbolic designs seem to stem from who the character was before entering the circus and not just after. And it seems obvious now that for her entire life, Ragatha has been something of an emotional ragdoll for her mother. But like I said, I think it could be physical too. The reason I think this in particular is because Ragatha is missing one eye, which has been replaced with a button. This seems to give the visual of a black eye, someone who has been hit so hard that they now have bruising in that area. Now, dolls with buttons for eyes are nothing new, but when a doll has one normal eye that's a patch and the other is a button, it's because that eye has been damaged during play, with a button eye being the only reasonable way to replace it. This is just a really sad idea to me, not just because of what happened to Ragatha or how she evolved because of it, but also because of the way she still seems to want to be close to her mom. We see this interestingly back in episode 4, when Ragatha is on the stupid sauce and she starts talking about stuff that seemed very personal, stuff she kept to herself before because she was too stupid to filter her thoughts now. It's here that we first heard that she had horses, something she brought up saying that she missed. In addition to this, she also alluded to the events and classes her mother would make her attend as a farm girl in high society, such as tea parties and dancing lessons. One thing that didn't make too much sense until this new episode, however, was Ragatha's conversation with the Gloink Queen. For those who saw my recent video on how each of the characters made it into the circus, I talked about this a bit there as well, but there I mostly used it to talk about the relationship between Ragatha and her mom. You see, in this scene from episode 4, Ragatha is talking to the Gloinks Queen about the names of the Gloinks, and she's curious if they each have unique names and identities. Here, the Gloink Queen acts offended and insists that she loves all of her children individually. This is something Ragatha humorously acts like is the most beautiful thing ever, but now knowing about her childhood, this actually makes a lot of sense. This gives the impression that her mother didn't love her very much, something we saw in episode 5 when she was talking at the bar, but it also hints at the idea that some of her problems came less from just her mother and more so from being seen as just another one of her children. It is considered more common in farm life to have many children instead of just one or even a few, and in this larger family setting, it's hard for one child to be seen as distinct from the others, and if Ragatha is perhaps just the oldest child, she may have been held to a higher standard, being forced to basically take care of them for her mother. This makes sense with Ragatha because she is not just a rag doll, but she's based on the character Raggedy Ann. Raggedy Ann is important here because she's not just one character in her own story, but she's always paired with her brother, Raggedy Andy. And it's very common in the case of twins in particular for parents to treat them as a unit, and if one acts bad, that can have negative effects on the other. This means that even if Ragatha wasn't physically hurt by her own mother, she may have been physically hurt by a sibling of hers, and her mother may have just put up with it, maybe even acting like Ragatha deserved it even if she doesn't know. This would explain a lot about Ragatha's dynamic with Jax in particular, whom many wanted to treat like a sort of brother figure to Ragatha all the way back since the pilot. Once fans realized that Ragatha was meant to be modeled after Raggedy Ann, many fans wanted to paint Jax as Raggedy Andy. But Jax is more of a bully than the supporting brother that Raggedy Andy generally is. And the feeling she gets when being taken advantage of by Jax and having everyone else essentially tell her to calm down afterwards may play into something similar that happened to Ragatha as a child, maybe where she was physically hurt by a brother who even gave her a black eye, and her mother just looked the other way and told her to calm down. This is probably the darkest theory we've covered in this show so far, so let's be sensitive in the comments today, and if you want more theories like this, be sure to subscribe as we plenty of more coming. See you guys next time.